It's not likely that those who compiled the Revised Common Lectionary that we use for our reading each Sunday knew that in the week of October 2018, the Diocese of Chicago's clergy conference would be on the theme of power and authority and leadership. No, it's just serendipity that we are assigned this particular gospel reading on this day. For this reading is exactly on that same theme, about Jesus' leadership style and how he uses his power and authority in a very different way from the society surrounding him. This week and last, the writer of the Gospel of Mark has given us teachings of Jesus that have told us that the last shall be first and the first last, that you must be as a little child to enter the kingdom, that a rich person's chances of entering the kingdom are about as likely as a camel going through the eye of a needle. And now today, that to be great, one must be a servant. To be first, one must be the slave of all. We might ask, why all this repetition? Why the same message or variations on it? Couldn't we go on now to something else? Or might we discover that these are really the core of Jesus' message, the substance of what it means to follow him and to lead in his name? That to dare to call ourselves Christians means accepting a world that has been turned upside down from what is usual. A world that is not about accumulating wealth, not about building a power base and rising in the hierarchy, not about gaining the status that allows you to have others serving you, doing the scut work so you can focus on what is really important. Now, one of the characteristics of Mark's gospel is that the disciples are made to look a bit slow. They never seem to quite get what it is that Jesus is teaching, at least not in the moment. But I think it's about more than those disciples. I think it's about the people in the time that this gospel was being written, well after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, who were struggling to know what it would mean to follow Christ. And I think it's about today's world, where many have lost sight of the radical nature of Jesus' ministry and teachings. For those who become part of a Christian church because they want to be comfortable, because they want to take part in the fellowship and the belonging, or even because they want to preserve memories of things that might have been easier earlier in life in a simpler time. Not that the church isn't these things, it's just that it is not only these things. Jesus' way is not comfortable. Servant is not a word we like to have applied to us, after all, and slave is even worse. But if we read these gospel stories closely, we recognize immediately that Jesus was not concerned about the disciples being comfortable. He was telling them again and again and again what the cost of discipleship would be. This was probably not a very popular message in the first century. It's not very popular now. But the funny thing is, those who finally got it discovered something of tremendous value that overshadowed whatever they thought was vitally important before. Let's look for a moment at James and John. Along with Peter, these two, called the sons of thunder, were in Jesus' inner circle. Remember, they were the ones chosen to go to the mountaintop where they witnessed Jesus' transfiguration. And in this story, they say they want Jesus to do whatever they ask of him. That seems a bit bold, doesn't it? What they want is to be seated at that big table, one on each side. They get that he is something special, maybe even the predicted Messiah. But they don't seem to get what he has said about what's going to happen to him when he gets to Jerusalem. They're clinging to that popular notion that when the Messiah comes, he will rout the Roman oppressor and bring back the kingdom of David. So, when Jesus comes to power, like King David, he will need deputies or a cabinet. And these two want to be at that boardroom table. Well, that ticks off the other 10. They want a piece of the action too. And that's when Jesus has to dash their hopes and tell them once again that God's kingdom does not work that way. It's not at all about status and lording it over one another. It's about serving one another. A pivotal book, at least for me, was making the rounds of the Doctor of Ministry programs when I was studying and later when I was adjunct faculty. Though its subject was about corporate leadership, where the goal is about success and profit, there are some lessons for the church. And no, seminaries do not just stick to theology books. This book is called Good to Great by a man named Jim Collins. Collins and his researchers set out to find companies that went from being just good enough or even mediocre to being great. Using stock prices, they found companies that had a turning point where the price jumped significantly, well beyond other companies in their industry, beyond companies in general, and sustained this significant change over a number of years. The researchers drilled down into these companies' stories to try to identify what was going on that led to that turning point and that began to move the companies from good to great. It's probably not surprising that leadership played a big role. But it is surprising that the CEOs were not the charismatic, upfront leaders we might expect to see. No, in fact, some of them did not even believe that they should be CEOs. They did not come in with their own visions that they then worked to implement. What they did was listen and decide who were the right people to move the company forward. And with the right people in place, the vision emerged. And when the vision emerged, these CEOs focused on it and believed in it. And when they believed in it, the company began to move. Oh, and when the CEOs were interviewed about this amazing success, they said things like, "Oh, we just hit a streak of good luck." Or, "Well, I had a lot of good people who made this happen." There were a few side benefits as well. With the right people, managing the people was basically beside the point. They did not need to be managed. They were excited. They were enjoying what they were doing and enjoying being valued and being able to participate in the direction of the company. Seems to me that these CEOs were exercising servant leadership. And the employees, they were living out a call and following a vision, not just putting in their time or punching a time clock. We don't measure a church's greatness with stock prices, of course, but there are other signs. A joyousness that infects and invites. Growth that is not a reward in itself, but a result of others wanting to be part of what is happening. The joy and vitality that is grounded in the love of God and one another. And that, I think, is what Jesus is calling us to do. It's not that we aren't supposed to aspire to great things or great achievements, for of course we are to use the gifts that we are given. It's more about the motivation, perhaps, and how we go about our work. Do we work out of joy or out of duty? Do we get where we want to go by stepping on others or throwing around our weight or seeking deals and special privileges? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we are to be Christian doormats, letting others push us around or belittle us. And are we prepared to take what comes, the challenges and the setbacks along with the rewards? Our clergy conference speaker was Bishop Mary Gray Reeves, who turned around the troubled diocese of El Camino Real in Southern California, there near the Silicon Valley, which figures in her work and what she does with her church. She talked to us about authority as a spiritual practice. That woke me up and has been dominating my thoughts ever since. I never thought about authority as a spiritual practice. We talked about what is called new power as used in Silicon Valley. Power held by many, not by just a few. Power deployed through networking, through mass participation, a current, type of an electrical current, coursing through the system rather than a currency held by those at the top. Think Uber or Airbnb. For a long time, we've looked at concepts like bottom-up or grassroots power. But there's another term familiar in today's world of technology. Rather than the boss downloading the procedure manual and all the rules to the employees, ideas percolate among the staff and are uploaded. Now, this is not a bunch of individuals doing their own thing. Like in Jim Collins' research, they are all working toward that shared vision and for the good of all, not for their own pet projects. Can this work in the Episcopal Church, usually known for a hierarchical top-down governance? Bishop Gray Reeves believes that it can. She believes that we are perfectly organized for it. We have 4 orders of ministry: laity, bishops, priests, and deacons. Each has a primary role, but those roles can be balanced in spiritual practices that are relational, creative, and proactive, and in ways that use what is good and life-giving in our tradition and structure, while remaining open to the Spirit working in and among us. It's sort of like Jesus did with the law, isn't it? Not destroying the law, but fulfilling it, giving it a new understanding, and focusing on those things that were ultimately important. Now, I have not fully digested what went on at that clergy conference, so there are probably a lot of holes in what I've said and in my thinking. But I intend to go on reflecting about power and authority being a spiritual practice and just what that might look like. And maybe, who knows, maybe understanding will come. As Barbara Brown Taylor says, Jesus is the example. He's not in it for reward. He's in it for the love of God, who promises him nothing but the opportunity to give himself away. If we do not understand it, she says, we should not be too hard on ourselves. No one ever has. Not Peter, not James, not John, nor any of the others who were nearest and dearest to him. If we understand any better than they did, it's only because Jesus is still serving us, still feeding us, still giving himself away. She continues, this much is for sure. Whether we can make sense of it or not, serving is how we will transform the world, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. Our leaders can be servants, and the best ones will be, but we must never surrender our power to the powerful. The power God has given us is the strongest stuff in the world, the power to serve, which is the power to turn the Zebedee brothers' questions upside down. Not, teacher, we want you to do for us what we ask of you, but, teacher, we want to do for you whatever you ask of us. May it be so. Amen.